Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching the 100th edition of World Panorama. Like always, get ready to catch up on the biggest international news of the week. I'm Sana Khan. Before we get you detailed reports, here's a look at the top stories. Nelson Mandela, South Africa's first black president, dies at the age of 95. World Panorama takes a look at how far was he successful in dismantling the racist and apartheid system world over. US Vice President Joe Biden visits China as air zone tensions simmer, warns against escalating tensions further. Protests in Thailand stalled to celebrate the king's birthday. He calls on people to do their duty for stability and the security of the nation. And it's India versus US face-off at the WTO in Bali. Make or break meeting goes down to the wire. Our top story, Nelson Mandela, South Africa's first black president and its greatest son, who led his country out of the apartheid and became a hero to millions around the world, died peacefully at his home in Johannesburg on Thursday. He was 95. His vision led to the dismantling of the country's racist and brutal apartheid system. An extraordinary life, Mandela indeed changed the destiny of his people, armed with just one weapon, that was non-violence, the Gandhian way, after his initial ideas of violent means to achieve freedom for his people. And it was but befitting for India to honour him with the Bharat Ratna as one of the only two non-Indians to have received this award. He had visited India as the first country after he was released from prison in 1990. Mandela lived his life like a true fighter, and it was but a full circle for the destiny of blacks in South Africa when the anti-apartheid icon, who spent 27 years in prison, became the president of South Africa. That was in 1994 and held the post till 1999. He was the first black South African to hold the office and the first elected in a fully representative, multi-racial election. Mandela truly decided the destiny of South Africa as a rainbow nation after he became president, taking the coloured and whites along with him as he, with his committed policy of non-violence, dismantled institutionalized racism. This time we will be discussing his legacy, what changes and to what extent has he been able to bring about the world society at large, and the challenges that still remain. Now, let's get an expert perspective. Joining me on the show this week is Professor Anand Kumar. He's a professor in sociology at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. Thank you, sir, so much for joining me on the show. Before I come to you with those questions, I'd like all our viewers to have a look at this report.
In the words of Nelson Mandela, racism is blight on the human conscience. The idea that any people can be inferior to another to the point where those who consider themselves superior define and treat the rest as subhuman denies the humanity even of those who elevate themselves to the status of gods. The great conciliator is gone, Nelson Mandela, whose unbreakable spirit and shining magnanimity knit together a South Africa torn by centuries of racism and exploitation, died late Thursday at 95. With moist eyes and tributes on their lips, people across the world today mourn the death of a global anti-apartheid icon, Nelson Mandela. Hailed as a true Gandhian and an inspiration for millions like US President Barack Obama.
Tonight our thoughts and prayers are with the Mandela family in South Africa. They're grieving the loss of a man, a moral giant who embodied the dignity and the courage and the hope and sought to bring about justice not only in South Africa, but I think to inspire millions around the world, and he did that. The idea that every single human being ought to be free and that oppression can end and justice can prevail.
Rich tributes poured in from across the globe as world leaders paid their homages to the respected statesman.
He represented the conscience of the world. In a world marked by division, his was an example of working for reconciliation and harmony, and we are not likely to see another of his kind for a long time to come.
I would like to express my extreme grief at the passing away of a man who stood for human rights and for equality in this world. He made us all understand that nobody should be penalized for the color of his skin, for the circumstances into which he is born. He also made us understand that we can change the world. We can change the world by changing attitudes, by changing perceptions. For this reason, I would like to pay him tribute as a great human being who raised the standard of humanity.
And I got a chance to meet with him back in '98 with my father at his home, and had a great lunch together. And you've heard me tell the story many times, so I'm not going to bore you with it again, but he certainly had an impact on my life and certainly my father, and I think that time frame in which when he came out could have, the country could have fallen apart. It could have gone a lot of different ways, and he led it to where it's at now, and you know, and the world's going to miss him.
Mandela was born in 1918, the son of a tribal leader in a remote village in South Africa. One of the giants of the 20th century, Mandela's career was marked not only by his heroic resistance to racism, but also by his poised and soft-spoken demeanor.
We are going forward. The march towards freedom and justice is irreversible. I have spoken about freedom in my lifetime. Your struggle, your commitment, and your discipline has released me to stand before you today.
After enduring nearly 3 decades of prison, much of it at hard labor in a lime quarry, Mandela emerged as a gentle leader who became South Africa's first black president. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his leadership in ending apartheid without violence, and later became a global statesman who inspired millions of people around the world.
Let no individual, section, faction, or group ever regard itself as greater than the organization and the common good of all our people.
Mandela's death seals the end of an era when forging a new nation through unity and reconciliation came before efficient and accountable government, or an inclusive and thriving economy. With South Africa's great promise not yet fulfilled, his successors must rise to the challenge of honoring his legacy.
I have fought very firmly against white domination. I have fought very firmly against black domination. I cherish the ideal of a new South Africa where all South Africans are equal.
Professor Kumar, let's talk about Nelson Mandela and his legacy first. To what extent, as I pointed out, has he been successful in bringing about a change in the society today?
I think Nelson Mandela got synonymity with the challenge of humanity to go beyond racism. This has been an age-old crisis. Skin color as a great divider and as the basis of discrimination and exclusion of nearly 9/10 of humanity during the age of European expansion and empire building by the British and the French, and of course in North America.
Right.
There were many struggles, violent, non-violent, but he became the story of success by going through self-suffering and finding a unique solution around the principles of truth and reconciliation, inspired by the doctrine of non-violence and satyagraha of Mahatma Gandhi.
Right.
He connects Asia and Africa in the pursuit of justice without weapons. He also becomes more unique than any of his predecessors, be it Dr. Martin Luther King or others, where he was not only leader in protest, he was also leader in power. Right. He handled mass mobilization as well as the first non-apartheid government which had the responsibility of dismantling the racist regime of nearly a century through constitutional means.
Right.
I think he became a living example of struggle for justice without animosity, without hate, without anger. Nobody
That's why
else.
perhaps he's equated so much so with Mahatma Gandhi. You know, he's known as the second Gandhi, and now the world has lost him. Do you think it's going to have a huge bearing? Let's start with South Africa. Do you think racism is going to bounce back?
No, not at all, because I have seen South Africa from close quarters because of our partnership in the university life with their intellectuals, their younger generation. We had chance of visiting South Africa and also meeting Dr. Nelson Mandela while he visited India. He has created a philosophy as well as a politics of reconciliation as well as justice. So the element of racism has been uprooted by the life and policies of Dr. Nelson Mandela-led African National Congress and the government which started with him as the first black president elected on the basis of a universal adult franchise. But yes, there may be reverse discrimination. There may be some, fears, some psychological barriers which will take some time to go away. Whereas the possibility of a roadmap beyond racism of either blacks or whites is already there, because this is the contribution of Dr. Nelson Mandela through struggle, through reconciliation and through governance.
Let me just quote some of the data that I've pulled up from my research. Now today, this is what's happening there. South Africa's black citizens still earn on an average a sixth of what the whites over there earn, and also the overall quality of education, and there's still some sort of discrimination that is there.
It's not discrimination, it is asymmetry, it is inequality. There is no basis to exclude anybody on the basis of race anymore, which was the dominant principle. Today, the quest for justice and principle of equality are together. But then as it happens, it's a transitional society. They are going through liberalization, which is creating a new elite in South Africa from the black communities. But the historical shadow of inequality, deprivation and destitution is still very large, and they have to move very rapidly. They are doing all right because they have emerged as the leader of whole African continent. They are part of global fraternity of BRICS.
Right.
But you're very right that a lot more has to be done much more quickly.
So there's a gap that needs to be filled up
Great
in many years.
Great gap.
Right. So if we talk about discrimination on the basis of color of the skin, now it's seen world over and not just in one particular place. You had those cases a few years back about Indian students being, attacked, and the motive was racially, it was racially motivated. So, what impact sort of has a person like Nelson Mandela, he has had over these years? These incidents really continue to escalate.
He becomes an icon of hope for justice. As Barack Obama said, that I am in the president office of United States of America because of the legacy of Gandhi, Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela. They suffered for our success. So Nelson Mandela represents that potential of humanity where the victims can rise above the basic instinctual reaction of revenge and reverse discrimination. And he became the uniting force for a much divided nation like South Africa. And he also became messenger of reconciliation on the basis of truth, not ignoring the past, and for a better society. So Nelson Mandela became the pathfinder for the otherwise tormented humanity on the lines of racist discrimination. And he is today an advancement on the experiments and models created by Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King.
Right.
It seems that with his passing away, the challenge becomes closer to all of us, because as long as he was physically there, everybody was relaxed that Mandela is there and he is guiding everybody, the whole humanity. But with his passing away, the incomplete process, the incomplete dream becomes our responsibility.
Right. We have to take it upon ourselves to take his idea, his hope that he's left behind forward. So it was a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you
Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with our viewers. We'll take a very short break here. Lots more in store up ahead. A report on US Vice President Joe Biden's visit to Japan and China amid the air zone row. Stay tuned. You're watching World Panorama. In candid face-to-face talks, Vice President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping traded arguments over China's contentious new air defense zone, with no consensus about how to defuse an issue that's raising anxieties across Asia and beyond. For Japan, the task of retaining control of the disputed Senkaku Islands is especially fraught, as the delicately orchestrated visit to Tokyo by US's Vice President highlighted this week. Here's a report.
After a marathon session of more than 5 hours, US Vice President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping failed to resolve the thorny issue that has overshadowed Biden's trip. China's abrupt declaration on 23rd November that all foreign aircraft must seek Chinese permission to enter a broad area over the East China Sea, including over disputed islands known as the Senkaku in Japan and the Diaoyu in China.
But China's recent and sudden announcement of the establishment of a new air defense identification zone has, to state the obvious, caused significant apprehension in the region. And I was very direct about our firm position and our expectations in my conversations with President Xi.
目前国际和地区格局正在经历深刻复杂变化，世界经济进入深度的调整期，地区热点问题此起彼伏，气候变化、能源安全等全球性挑战日益凸显，世界并不安宁。
The United States has made clear it will stand by treaty obligations that require it to defend the Japanese-controlled islands, but it is also reluctant to get dragged into any military clash between rivals Japan and China.
But the way I was raised was to believe that change presents opportunity. Opportunity on regional security on a global level, opportunity on climate change and energy, and a whole range of issues that the world needs to see change in the next decade or so.
Earlier, Biden was in Japan, where he met with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and held a joint news conference amid rising tensions in East China Sea.
中国の力による一方的な現状変更の試みを黙認せず、力強い日米同盟に基づき、引き続き緊密に連携して対応していくことを確認いたしました。
This action has raised regional tensions and increased the risk of accidents and miscalculation.
The Obama administration sees China's move as part of a broader strategy to solidify its claims to territory as the country asserts its power more vigorously in the region. Wary that nationalist sentiments in China may preclude Xi from backing down now that he's established the zone, Washington has sought to persuade Beijing to quietly refrain from enforcing it, nullifying it in practice, if not in deed.
And Thailand's revered king appealed to people to work for the stability and security of the country, but did not make any direct comment on the anti-government protests that have deeply polarized the Buddhist majority nation. Anti-government protesters and security forces observed an uneasy truce on the eve of the king's 86th birthday. However, tensions remain high as protesters vowed to continue their fight after the celebrations end. After days of violence and chaos triggered by fierce anti-government protests, Thailand has finally something to cheer about: the king's birthday.
ตัวปฏิบัติงานให้สมฐานะและหน้าที่
The king, adored by all Thais, did not make any direct reference to the protests in his speech. The king is a constitutional monarch with no formal political role, but he is seen as a unifying figure for Thais.
พระมหากรุณาที่ยิ่งฉายชัดและกระจ่างแจ้งไปทั่วราชนาเขต ข้าพุทธเจ้าทั้งปวงผู้เป็นพระสงฆ์นิกรได้ครองชีวิตที่เป็นสุขและร่มเย็นเพราะได้อาศัยพระปรีชาญาณและน้ำพระราชหฤทัยในใต้ฝ่าละอองธุลีพระบาท
The protesters accuse Yingluck of being a proxy for her elder brother, former Premier Thaksin Shinawatra, who was ousted in 2006 by the military and now is in self-exile in Dubai. A day earlier, hundreds of anti-government protesters gathered at Thailand's National Police headquarters, broke through the gate and knocked down a concrete barrier. The protests are led by former Democrat Party lawmaker Suthep Thakksuban, who has already rejected negotiations. His followers have vowed to bring down Yingluck's government, accusing her of being a puppet of her brother Thaksin Shinawatra. And over to Ukraine, where the government is showing no sign of yielding as thousands of people continue to rally in Kiev against the decision to freeze ties with the European Union and get closer to Russia. And economic pressure is mounting on Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych amid a protest movement to unseat him after government officials visiting Moscow and Beijing did not disclose any progress on securing much-needed financial support.
Ukraine today is dangerous and an unpredictable place. The Ukrainian government's recent rejection of closer ties with the European Union has resulted in the largest demonstrations in Ukraine's recent history, an extraordinary outpouring of millions of citizens who are calling for President Viktor Yanukovych and his government to resign.
Люди зараз зібралися, перекрили всій вхід, ніхто туди не попаде і відемо. Тільки на це полагаємося, бо більше ми нічого не маємо. Надії, будемо триматися до кінця і ніякого нового року і свят не буде. Як то кажуть, без Януковича його не буде зовсім.
Я думаю, що це дуже добре, тому що це нас формує як особистостей, нас формує як справжніх українців. І тут викристалізовуються цінності і християнські, і людські, національні, якісь певні державні. Я думаю, що такі речі нас гуртують і роблять нас справді народом.
Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev has called for stability and order in Ukraine as the country remains gripped by mass protests.
У вас сейчас довольно такой активный политический сезон. Мы внимательно, конечно, следим за тем, что происходит в нашей стране. Но, безусловно, это внутреннее дело самой Украины. Хотя, конечно, очень важно, чтобы в стране была стабильность и порядок.
After a round of talks with the country's opposition, German Foreign Minister indicated that the door to Europe for Ukraine remains open.
Wir sind als Europäer hierher gekommen zu Europäern. Und das Schicksal der Ukraine ist Europa nicht gleichgültig. Wir werben für die europäischen Werte. Und die Tür nach Europa, sie steht für die Ukraine unverändert offen. Wir wollen die Ukraine an Bord Europas, weil wir der Überzeugung sind, dass wir kulturell, historisch, vor allen Dingen von unseren Werten auch zusammengehören. Das Angebot der Europäischen Union, auch das Angebot Deutschlands, es steht und deswegen ist dieses ein guter erster Beginn des Besuches hier heute in.
Experts point out the incessant protests on the streets of Kyiv may aggravate the country's already worsening economy, affecting economic stability and investment security.
Это, наверное, стало главной причиной, почему не было готовности сейчас украинского правительства, потому что пока именно оно контролирует расходование всех этих средств. И предложение, заявление о том, что требуются компенсаторные какие-то компенсации со стороны ЕС, потери рынка с Россией, они прозвучали в каких-то нереальных цифрах.
Last month, Yanukovych's government abruptly halted preparations to sign a key political and economic agreement with the EU and focus on ties with Russia instead. Russia has used strong economic pressure to derail the deal, unwilling to lose this former part of its empire to the West.
And much else has been unfolding around the world. Here's a quick wrap of all the other international news of the week.
Indian Trade Minister said his country will not compromise to a deal that will jeopardize the food security, diminishing chances for the World Trade Organization to conclude an ambitious trade pact by the end of this week. Representatives from 159 countries are to decide whether or not to adopt the first WTO multilateral agreement that aimed to ease customs procedures at the end of the 9th Ministerial Conference in Bali, Indonesia. The UN Security Council authorized French and African troops in Central African Republic to use force to protect civilians, imposed an arms embargo on the country, and asked the United Nations to prepare for a possible peacekeeping mission. In a unanimously adopted resolution, the 15-member council also asked UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to establish an inquiry into human rights abuses in the landlocked, mineral-rich nation of 4.6 million people, which slipped into chaos after Seleka rebels ousted President Francois Bozier in March. Bangladeshi opposition supporters detonated scores of homemade bombs and removed railway tracks to disrupt train services during nationwide protests against upcoming elections. Railways became the main target of the blockaders, but elsewhere, supporters of the Bangladesh Nationalist Party blocked roads, threw homemade bombs and set fire to vehicles. The protests followed the announcement by the Election Commission in November that elections would be held on 5th of January. Al-Qaeda's Yemen branch Al-Malahem has claimed the Thursday attack on the Defense Ministry complex in the capital of Sana'a, killing 52 and wounding at least 167. The two-state strike included a massive suicide car bomb, followed by a fierce gun battle fought by men armed with machine guns, hand grenades and rocket-propelled grenade launchers. Indonesia's Mount Sinabang volcano continued to spew large amounts of ash into the sky on Thursday. The Indonesian government raised the volcano's status on November 24 after observing increased activity. It had previously not been active for 4 centuries. More than 17,000 people evacuated following the initial eruption and are still at 31 temporary shelters in a nearby town, according to the officials.
Time now for all the very latest news from the world of movies, music and lifestyle. Here's our entertainment wrap. British actor Colin Firth joined World War II veterans on the red carpet for the UK premiere of The Railway Man, a story that tells of one man's torture at the hands of the Japanese in building a railway in the Far East. Firth, given an Academy Award for his role as King George IV in The King's Speech, was joined on the red carpet by his wife Livia at the premiere of the film, in which he portrays World War II veteran Eric Lomax, who was captured by the Japanese and spent years as a prisoner of war. The Railway Man opens in the UK on January 1st. The Los Angeles County coroner said that Fast and Furious actor Paul Walker died from multiple injuries in a weekend car crash as Universal Pictures suspended production of the 7th installment in its lucrative car racing film franchise. Walker, 40, was a passenger in a fiery one-car crash last Saturday in Santa Clarita, California, about 30 miles northwest of Los Angeles, that also killed 38-year-old driver Roger Rodas. The coroner said Walker's death resulted from traumatic and thermal injuries. A day after celebrating her 32nd birthday, pop star Britney Spears stopped traffic on the famed Las Vegas Strip, where she was welcomed at a new home at the Planet Hollywood Resort and Casino. Sin City's newest headliner arrived in an impeccably restored 1958 Chevrolet Impala convertible as crowds lined a red carpet in front of the casino, where dancers performed to the singer's hits Baby One More Time, Oops I Did It Again, Toxic, Slave for You and Circus. One of Princess Diana's most romantic and ornate gowns sold at an auction in London, fetching over £85,000. The so-called fairy tale dress was designed by one of Diana's favourite designers, the Emanuels, in 1986. The dress is white organza and satin and has shimmering gold panels, jewel-like rhinestones and pearl adornments. That's all we have for you in this edition of World Panorama. See you next week, same time, with more international news. Till then, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. This week we are celebrating 100 episodes of the show, for which I would like to thank all my team producers working for over 100 weeks, Richa Nagpal, Milita, Nidhi, Soumya, my team of editors with a special mention for Jaspal, the graphics team, the MCR and the PCR crew, the guest coordination team, as well as the makeup people, and many others who've made this show possible each week. We hope that you, our viewers, continue to love the show like you always have. I'll be back soon. Thanks for tuning in.